Hi, my name's Alastair Matchett and I work at Financial Edge and we teach investment bankers. And the new episode of Industry is out. So let's take a closer look to see what we think is true, less true, and just downright false.
Why are you here then?
I think this is the closest thing to a meritocracy there is. I only ever want to be judged on the strength of my abilities.
And paid for it.
Welcome, graduates.
I know for a fact a lot of people are active on the street. I want to know why the flows aren't coming our way.
Well, 80% of my guys are away.
So here they're talking about flow. And flow is super important to a trading desk because gone are the days where they're taking proprietary positions and making bets on the markets. Banks are really not able to do that now because they have to hold so much capital to make those kind of decisions. So typically, most desks will make money by making a bid-offer spread. And what that means is that they will sell the securities at a slightly lower price than they will buy them at. And therefore, the more business they get, the more flow they get, the more money they will get. And it's very, very important to have the largest flow because you have the most liquidity. And that typically means you'll be able to get the best prices. And that becomes a reinforcing circle within the actual market because the bank that's doing most business in that security will tend to get more business because they'll be able to give the best prices.
I haven't heard from Fallon.
Called twice daily, couldn't get past Junior.
Did you say you work for me?
Yes.
Okay, call every hour. I got a meeting.
So here you've got the interaction between Harper and her boss, who are both on the sales team of this bank. They're talking about having an exclusive relationship between the fund manager and the sales desk. And that would be really unusual to have a kind of formal exclusivity. Generally what will happen is that the fund managers will actually get to trust and know the salespeople really well. And there'll be kind of a mix of getting good ideas from them, getting great prices from their traders because they're in the flow of the security, but then also a really kind of friendship and a good relationship. And those really do develop. And what happens is if you're really good in sales, when you move institutions, as long as the new institution has enough flow and enough credibility, you can often move clients with you. And that's where you can start getting paid the really big bucks in sales.
You convince them you're a friend, and they'll forget what they are, which is a counterparty.
So this is a quick one. Harper's colleague is talking about a counterparty. And what that means is one side of a trade. So if two entities are trading, it could be an asset manager, it could be the investment bank, it could be a private client. They are both essentially counterparties to each other, the counterparty on the transaction. So every trade will have two counterparties, the buyer and the seller.
I've been thinking about asking to transfer to sales and trading.
Salespeople are the lowest of the low. You are different because you think for yourself. I mean, look, okay. Too intellectual. See, now you look like a salesman.
Okay, well I can't see, so...
I have seen you in contacts.
So this is quite an interesting interaction between Theo and Gus. Gus is in IBD, which stands for Investment Banking Department. That tends to be an American term, so sometimes it may be called corporate finance if it's a British institution or a European institution, or banking. However, there's two things. Firstly, you can see here the kind of snobbishness between investment banking versus sales and trading, particularly sales. And certainly sometimes people will talk about salespeople as smile and dial, as really just being quite fluffy and managing a relationship. And to be fair on them, it's actually a very difficult job, sales. And sure, the personality is important and the ability to make a client feel at ease is important, but also, as I said before, do you have the flow and do you have the research ideas? So it's not just about a relationship sales. There's actually a lot more to it. And successful salespeople earn a lot of money. It is true, though, that the sales job is much less transferable than, say, the corporate finance or investment banking job, because it's very easy to go into a corporation and run their internal M&A department or become a chief financial officer out of something like IBD or corporate finance. And you'll find that much harder to do in the sales job. So you can see that there's a snobbishness. The second issue is that it's actually difficult for people to move between investment banking and sales and trading. Certainly not impossible, and it absolutely does happen, but you'll generally find that the recruiters of these institutions will target a kind of profile who they think will do well in the sales and trading environment, which is very fast-paced, you need to think on your feet, versus the IBD department, which is much more studious, slower paced, but probably is more kind of intellectual in terms of actually doing lots of detailed analysis for each individual transaction. So people will transition between different sides of the bank, but it's by certainly no means something that is very common.
Millionaire 25, cabinet 35, party leader 45, prime minister 55. You know, Heseltine wrote his on the back of an envelope. Planned your life in a copy of Vanity fucking Fair.
Yeah.
Now this is another quickie, but I just really wanted to slice this in. One of the things about investment banking generally is that most people who go into it tend to be ambitious, and the collection of people will generally be very competitive and very ambitious. Not absolutely everybody, but generally speaking, the people you will interact with will all be working very hard, be very serious about succeeding. And there's some really good things about that, but there's also some bad things as well. So it's not the kind of industry that you really want to go into if you don't have a really quite a seriously ambitious streak, because you will kind of stand out, and I think you'll find it difficult to be around people who are just generally so ambitious.
We ran the model. I don't think we thoroughly went through the net debt adjustments.
Hunger Fix pushed Goldman up to primary bookrunner. They don't want us anywhere near the top of the tombstone. It's fucking bad PR.
Sorry, what do you mean tombstone?
You get a little trophy when you complete a deal. Tombstone.
So this is an interesting bit. You've got Gus, who is the analyst, talking to Lucinda, who's his boss, and she's probably an associate or vice president, more likely to be an associate because she's working so closely with Gus. Now, the first thing he said is he's talking about the model and making net debt adjustments. Net debt is just the indebtedness of a particular company, less cash, hence the term net debt. And any adjustments would be things like adjusting for things that would be treated as debt for valuation purposes, but won't necessarily be treated as debt in the accounts, like, for example, an underfunded pension scheme. That's fine. But then they talk about tombstones, and absolutely, tombstones happen. Tombstones typically happen at the end of a transaction, and that transaction could be an M&A transaction, or it could be a stock issuance or a debt issuance as well, or in some cases, a syndicated loan. So at the end of the transaction, all the people who worked on the deal and the client will get given this typically perspex tombstone, which often has a kind of description of the deal. Maybe sometimes they have kind of unusual things, like if it's an oil deal, they'll actually put oil inside the perspex. Now, interestingly, Lucinda's talking about being a primary book runner, but it's pretty clear to me that she works in mergers and acquisitions. So that's financial advisory. And at this point, it's kind of worth explaining. Within the investment banking department, there are really two main areas of activity. M&A, which is financial advisory, which is valuing and advising companies on how to acquire or divest other businesses. And then capital markets, which is typically split into equity capital markets and debt capital markets. And the capital markets teams are doing security issuance into the markets. And that's often predicated by an M&A transaction which needs funding. But there will be two separate teams. So it's unlikely that Lucinda will have a tombstone with a book runner on it. And what book runner means is that when you issue shares into the market or bonds into the market, what you have to do is you have to assemble a collection of banks which can go out to all their investor relationships and talk to them about the new security that they're going to be issuing. And that could either be a share or it could be a bond. So you form this syndicate. And of course, as in life, not everybody is necessarily equal within the syndicate. And you have the lead book runners. And in the United States, that if you want to be the numero uno, it's called the left lead book runner. And that just means you're typically on the left-hand side of the prospectus, which is a document describing the security, and you'll be in the biggest font. And then as you kind of go down the pecking order, the font gets smaller, and you will generally generate most fees if you're the left lead book runner. Now, outside the US, typically they're called global coordinators, and I think they changed the name to primary book runner, just kind of give people that understanding that we kind of numero uno. But the reality is Lucinda, who works in M&A and doing the modeling, is unlikely to be actually working on a stock issuance or a debt issuance, and therefore wouldn't necessarily be involved in terms of doing the book running. That will be the capital markets teams, which are separate. So what they're doing here is incorrectly mixing the kind of M&A work with the capital markets work. And in reality, they're two separate teams, one advising and the other fundraising.
Que te hayan salido a salir.
Maxim, ¿qué tal?
Muy bien, gracias. Nuestras madres acaban de cumplir su monthly summit.
Oh,
I can't believe I didn't know you were a peer point. Well done.
okay.
Although it must be a weird time to be there right now.
Oh, but how's Brevin Howard? How long have you been there now?
So this is an interaction between Yasmin and her friend Maxim. And Yasmin works in FX sales on the trading floor in an investment bank, whereas in this case, Maxim works at Brevin Howard, which is one of the world's largest hedge funds. And it's mostly a macro fund manager, which means that they trade on really big moves in the macro economy, of which FX is a really big one. And that's obviously why they're working together. The other interesting thing to note is that increasingly in investment banking, particularly in Europe, you'll find people will be of lots of different nationalities, and they'll have typically multiple language skills. So if you want to go into the industry now, particularly because of Brexit, having language skills is becoming more and more and more important.
I'm passionate about croutons. Remember, all the best friendships start with a conspiracy.
Okay, Kenny.
Best part of the day, Yasmin's trade idea. Be ready to have your mind detonated.
Oh, wait,
This is for your growth, okay? You're part of this day, so you're part of its rituals. Pull up a pew. And imagine I burst into flames when I'm bored. Go!
Okay, I thought we could short cable.
What's cable?
Dollar sterling.
Well, so you're going to talk about Europe then?
What's your target and stuff?
1.25 to 1.35.
So a symmetric bet from 1.30.
Why not just flip a coin? Put it all on black? The art here is to look like you're not doing that.
Yeah, I just thought with everything that's going on with Europe at the moment that we
that's
could...
fucking specific. Yasmin, that is uninspired. Inspire her.
So this is a discussion between Yasmin and the rest of the sales team. I think it's overly dramatized. I've never seen somebody put on the spot in the middle of a trading floor like that and had to perform like a seal. So I think that that's an exaggeration. However, there's just a few terminology things that's worth talking about. So cable is the name for the dollar sterling exchange rate. And that is the rate of how many dollars will buy £1. And they're talking about what is your target. So what's your prediction of where the rate's going to be? And she answers that it's going to be between $1.25 to the pound to $1.35 to the pound. Now that's a massive range. And I think that's one of the reasons why they're kind of getting irritated with her, because it doesn't really, it's kind of meaningless to have such a wide range as your target. But the overall issue here is that they're trying to get her to be able to pitch an idea to an investor like the guy that she met, Maxim, who works at Brevin Howard, and trying to get business so they will trade through Pierpoint.
I would have thought that if our relationship had gone south, you'd have the grace to call, instead of me finding out over lunch with one of your PMs.
I told them in confidence.
So this is an interaction between Eric, who runs the cross-product sales desk, and his client, which is typically looks like to be a hedge fund manager, and their relationship's broken down because the client has gone direct to another desk, the FX desk. Now, I've never heard of cross-product sales. I guess it could exist. But it's likely that the bank would have an integrated client management system. So I can't imagine they wouldn't have seen some kind of interaction online. I don't think it would have been so difficult. But the client then talks about the PMs, and that just stands for portfolio manager. So within the hedge fund, the guy that they're meeting looks as though he's a very senior, and then underneath him he will have people actually managing specific funds. And one hedge fund can have 3 or 4 different funds that they'll be managing, maybe a macro fund, a long short fund, all doing different types of investment strategies, and they will be run by portfolio managers or PMs.
So we just wanted to get everyone together because it has been a difficult few weeks. For our institution, for all of us, pastoral care is as high on the agenda as it's ever been. We wanted to show you how much we appreciate your resilience and focus. From myself and all your bosses here tonight, they'll be the ones shepherding you through to RIF and ultimately help you to become permanent hires.
So in this case, you've got the dinner of the analysts, and it's a mix of sales and trading and IBD, and you've got the HR director who's talking to them as a whole. And one of the things that she's talking about is reduction in force. Now, this is pitched, I guess, as like an internship program. So people have landed an internship, which typically is your second year at university during the summer, that lasts 2 to 3 months. And at the end of the internship, you either get a full-time offer or you don't. And they're calling this reduction in force or RIF. Now, I've never heard that term. Typically, people just have an internship, and then the bank will decide whether they're going to get a permanent offer or not. And sometimes that happens actually after the end of the internship, so you won't actually get told at the time. Of course, this is a dramatic TV show, so they're going to amp it up. But things like the term reduction in force are used when banks restructure and they want to cut costs and they want to cut headcount, and they will have euphemisms like reduction in force. But I've never heard it in the context of an internship program to get either a full-time hire or no hire at all.
Lucinda mentioned there were going to be some changes in the team.
Oh, well, this isn't the place for that discussion. There'll be a meeting on Monday.
Are there going to be cuts?
There's going to be a restructuring. It's just a reshuffle. Your team's being subsumed into the other sector teams.
So in this interaction between Gus and the HR director, Gus, remember, is in investment banking and the advisory side, and he's working in an industry team. And it sounds like from what he and Lucinda are working on that he would work in the team which is typically called TMT, and that means tech, media and telecoms. Some banks who do a lot of tech may have a separate tech team. And within advisory, what you'll have is multiple teams that will do different industry verticals. So for example, you'll have industrials, which will do heavy industry. You'll have energy, which may do oil and gas, and lots of different teams working on different industry verticals so they can focus on understanding that industry. And different banks will have different mixes of teams depending on their skill set and their client relationships. Another team that's important, of course, is financial institutions, and that's often shortened to FIG, which stands for the Financial Institutions Group. And you'll also have healthcare. So there'll be lots of different teams based on industry verticals. And what's happening here is that Gus's and Lucinda's team is being basically broken up and subsumed into the other teams as part of a restructuring. And that's much more typically what a RIF would be called, is this kind of restructuring. So that's most of what's worth commenting on this episode. And if you have any additional questions, please do make comments below because we will answer them. If you have any additional questions about anything that's mentioned or anything about banking or anything related to what the program covers. I mean, it's a great program. I think probably there's a lot more sex and partying that happens in a normal investment banking role, particularly in IBD, because people are working super long hours. But certainly you do get some sparky social events where you've got some very ambitious, very driven people who've been working very hard. And when they release and they go out, they tend to go out big time. So that's certainly true, but certainly I think it's definitely a dramatized picture. So Let's see what happens next week.